Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien and Bubba here on the morning of Saturday, May 16th, 2020, sitting in for Paul Harvey today. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, Americans, this story is about the other pandemic that nobody hears about. And if Mr. Paul Harvey was here today, I hope he likes this version. I'm trying to make as good Paul Harvey stories as I can. But this is from my history and memory, okay? 120 years ago, almost 116, you guys created a new nation called Panama because you didn't like what Colombia told you to go stick it, and you wanted to create the Panama Canal. So, in 1904, Panama signed that terrible treaty, which wasn't signed by a Panamanian, but that's a different story. Then the Americans took possession of the 500 square mile or 550 some square mile area known as the Canal Zone. President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt that is, appointed a doctor to take over the medical part of the project. His name was William Gorgas. Now, this doctor came with flaws. He was similar to Dr. Fauci is for current President Trump. He had some ideas, which the president himself, and President Roosevelt mirrors President Trump, except that he had a good mind and leadership, which President Trump is a lousy president in that respect. But President Roosevelt was a bully, hard-headed, my way or your highway type of guy. But he did have good political sense and good leadership, which saved the day at the end. Well, in the first 18 months that Mr. Gorgas was the head of that, he had a big responsibility because at that time you had yellow fever and malaria. And here's the problem. President Roosevelt was touting the same drug that President Trump was touting because it worked on malaria. But it was anywhere effective on yellow fever. So that was a lousy drug. That killed 18 months, and a lot of Americans and other people died. So then there was a civilian appointee to head the project of the Panama Canal, an engineer named John Frank Stevens, I believe. He was appointed in 1906, and he gave Dr. Gorgas carte blanche. And he gave him $20 million. Whew, that's a lot of money in those days. And Dr. Gorgas, being the doctor that he was, and you remember his proteges at the time thought he was poppycock, including his mentor, Walter Reed. Okay? So he went head first. And the first thing he did was what they've done here, except that he divided the territory of the Canal Zone and Panama City into 11 sectors. And he divided those 11 sectors into 10 grids. And he had teams that worked on them. And there was a rudimentary way of knowing if you had the virus. So they had people that if they found out they had the virus, they put them in quarantine. Just like you did here, lockdown. Okay? But they went further. They went over there and figured, okay, the mosquitoes are doing this, so wherever there was standing water, they would put oil. And eradicate the water. They took down the barrels, which at the time, that's where people collected their water, was through not used barrels of oil. You know those 55-gallon drums? Well, that's what they did. And he went over there and started a fumigation project. He also started to sanitize all the area, destroy all buildings, build new buildings, create water treatment plants. and eradicate any place that any mosquitoes for malaria and yellow fever would be. By 1908, he had done a good job. He had mitigated the virus down to maybe 1 or 2%, which is pretty good, you know. And the Panama Canal opened in 1914. By the way, there was no successful vaccine for yellow fever until 1930. There was a lot of vaccines in the 1920s, and they all had disastrous effects. A Japanese doctor invented this vaccine that had a 90% rate of helping people with the virus, but nobody could duplicate it. So that went nowhere. Other vaccines that were developed by the French Institute and other countries, disastrous effects with people, atrocious side effects to them. This one South African working out of the Rockefeller Foundation in New York City developed a vaccine in 1930 that today is the only vaccine used for yellow fever, 17D. And it's just a mitigating vaccine. And by the way, yellow fever has no cure, even today. And it accounts for between 300 to 600,000 a year dead planet-wide from yellow fever. Therefore, you know that if you have countries that have yellow fever that are still there, don't get their vaccines and can't do anything, don't have no sanitation or anything else, and you mix that with COVID-19, you guys are in for a hell of a fun stuff if those two ever get together. Panama's got both of them. They still got yellow fever down in their Darien province, which it's a no man's land between Colombia and Panama. They haven't even finished the inter-American highway there because of issues going on there and the jungle. And because of the climate change and deforestation, that's going to be terrible. Anyway, this is your favorite alien and Bubba, sitting in for Paul Harvey today. And now, you know the rest of the story.